Rayla and Callum reunite this season, but the simple fact of their reunion does not repair their relationship. It does not bridge the rift between them. In fact, it initially does the exact opposite, making clear how wide this rift has grown. Rayla's leaving severed the relationship between them. It severed Callum's hope that they could have a future together. It caused him so many dreary, melancholy nights. It's implied that he has suffered immensely because of what happened, what Rayla decided to do on a whim. Because of her conception of her honor and her duties and responsibilities. And also because she's afraid, because she hesitates to share the full intensity and the full range of her messy muddle of feelings with Callum, even though she has committed to him as the person she cares the most about in the world. Callum is severely hurt by her leaving, and her coming back does not erase the struggle and suffering of those 2 years. One of my favorite aspects of Season 4 of The Dragon Prince is how willing it is to delve into that suffering, to delve into the murky ambiguities of trying to repair a broken relationship wherein both the parties deeply love each other, and yet Callum can hardly see how a relationship could work between them. He has a hard time forgiving Rayla. It certainly doesn't help that Rayla left without much of an explanation, and that her leaving accomplished very little. Repairing this relationship, patching together this broken vessel of their bond, is not a straightforward task. It's not something they can just muscle into with enough passion and enthusiasm. It requires openness, it requires vulnerability, and it requires a willingness for Callum to forgive her. These are not conditions that develop immediately. They take time, and they take a lot of effort on Rayla's part. She's someone who has never been particularly good at expressing the depths of her feelings, has to try and convince Callum that she has not just recommitted to him, but learned from what she did and is determined to stick with him. Considering how jumbled Rayla's own psychological state is, Callum is fundamentally skeptical of her, and perhaps he's right to be. The process of making possible a strong, mutual, firm connection between them is not linear, and that struggle in all its winding, sinuous complexities forms the backbone of their character journeys this season. This is not entirely satisfying to an audience that just watched them get together at the end of last season, especially considering that this process is so multi-layered, is so deeply complicated, and the show is so firmly committed to illuminating the contours of those complexities. And yet, this might be the most I've cared about Callum and Rayla over the course of this show. Their getting together was a simple, idealistic story, albeit one that had great allegorical resonance concerning the links between the humans and the elves have been inevitably fraught. Also, this season we do get a glimpse into the allegorical significance of a human and elf relationship with the marriage of Janai and Amaya, with Janai's brother understanding that the people of his kingdom will take this relationship as a fundamental break from their history and the traditions of their people. The symbolism represented by these human and elf relationships is powerful, but it is also innately vulnerable and tenuous. In Janai and Amaya's case, because of the sociological ramifications and the political ramifications. In Callum and Rayla's case, it is personal, but it is also cultural in a sense. Rayla has this deep moonshadow elf ethos still buried within her that emphasizes duty and honor above all else, even to the point of stoicism and disconnect. And it causes her a lot of pain and a lot of anguish. And it makes repairing her relationship with Callum as difficult as it is this season. Now, I have seen such a barrage of strangely incest fans not liking this season. I don't really understand why. I don't know how to say this without being condescending, but I think people fundamentally forgot what this show was like during the extended hiatus. That is perhaps reasonable, 3 years is a long time, but the show has always been jokey. It has always balanced its dramatic, philosophical, and political side with a more lighthearted, whimsical sense. That includes some jokes, not all of which land, and some moments that are a bit overly broad at times, such as some of Ezrin's speeches. That's not unique to this season, though. In fact, a lot of those more explicitly lighthearted elements are toned down somewhat this season compared to, say, Season 1. Go back and watch the first couple seasons of the show. This is quite apparent. And then, of course, there is the incessant mob of complaints that are always whining about plot holes, by which most people seem to mean everything that the show does not clearly and unambiguously explain, as though a work of art has the burden to explain every single little practical detail to the point of tedium, which it doesn't. And then there's always people who are so bamboozled as to why characters make the choices they do, instead of actually taking 5 seconds and thinking about why the character might be acting this way and what it means that they are, like an actual critic. But things like that are inevitable to a lot of fandoms. Nor are silly criticisms like this a new thing for the Dragon Prince fandom. What is happening, I believe, is that there is a deeper sense of dissatisfaction at play, much of which coming perhaps from the fact that any season was bound to be a letdown after that long of a hiatus, and also that the structure of this season is intended to some degree to dissatisfy. There are not a lot of big climactic action moments like we had in Season 3. And admittedly, not as much happens plot-wise. We get a clear scenario in the first episode that admittedly is a little heavy on exposition, that Claudia is trying to reawaken Erebos, and she only has 30 days to do so or Viren dies again. And that story does not get resolved this season. Instead, we are left on a point of irresolution. This is, again, not the first time the show has done this. The first 2 seasons did not have explosive and overly cathartic endings either, but this season combines that lack of a willingness to provide a coherent resolution with a fundamental willingness to undo a lot of the tidy conclusions and resolutions reached earlier, especially the Rayla and Callum relationship. I like this. But I will say that if you have not read Through the Moon, then the whole thing about Rayla leaving Callum only to come back at the end of the second episode of this new season could feel a bit contrived, like it only exists to promote more conflict between them. I think this is a more legitimate criticism than a lot of the criticisms I've heard, but I have two responses. Number one, you should read Through the Moon. It is fantastic. It is one of the most poignant pieces of the Dragon Prince universe. And number two, I find it hard to care that the scenario that results in this conflict between Rayla and Callum is sort of contrived, because the conflict itself is so satisfying. I like seeing these two stumble into the problems of trying to rebuild a fraught relationship. They have lost each other for so long that trying to connect is difficult. Callum has spent years of his life pining for Rayla, and to see her back like that does give him a sense of satisfaction. And he does want, at least to some degree, to forgive her and for things to be as they were, but he recognizes that he will never be the same person he was before she left him. And by the end of the season, she tries to understand that as well. She's different too. Not in a, oh, I've learned my lesson now way necessarily, but certainly in a way that demonstrates that she is more humble than before. She's less arrogant and overconfident, and she understands the importance of this relationship with Callum in a way that she didn't before. There are some moments I deeply love, like Rayla's conversation with Soren in the jungle, where she is desperate to not talk about her relationship with Callum, and yet Soren still manages to give her some slightly dopey but still reassuring advice. It's subtle and sweet, and the entire arc of this season for Rayla and Callum emphasizes moments like this, and the show is more rewarding because of such an emphasis, because this relationship, shattered because of Rayla's abrupt leaving, is so hard for them to put back together, even though they're both trying, even though Callum yearns to be able to love Rayla again. Repairing their relationship is possible. The show is not so dour as to present that as a goal that Rayla will never be able to achieve. But it is not an easy process. It is not a process that requires nothing but passion and energy and this singular drive toward a clear resolution that motivated these characters through the first 3 seasons. The political and sociological dynamics seem a bit more nuanced this season, and so do the personal dynamics. Scenes between Rayla and Callum, crestfallen and lonely as the two of them might be, are some of the most affecting scenes in the entire show. And I am so thrilled that we got to see that part of the relationship instead of it being nothing but blue skies and sweet words between them forever and ever. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this, as the American philosopher William James discusses the world is in a constant state of change and transience. These solid states that we place so much stock in are quite often just these small moments between the greater Heraclitean state of permanent transience and flux. Expectations should shift and morph. They should not be solid and static. The show did not give a lot of ardent, perhaps a little myopic fanboys what they thought they wanted. But I urge everyone to take a step back and separate the fact that the show did not give you what you necessarily wanted from the ability to see what the show is doing, and doing, I believe, quite well. So anyway, tune in soon for our next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.